It's been 2 weeks since the attacks in Mumbai captured the attention of the world. Within hours of the attacks, the Indian government pointed the finger at groups inside Pakistan, and recent findings appear to support the claims. How will the fallout from the Mumbai attacks affect President-elect Obama's plan to broker an India-Pakistan agreement over disputed Kashmir? This all in order to free Pakistani troops to fight on the western border with Afghanistan. Joining us to share his opinion is military and security expert Sunil Ram, a former Canadian military officer. He now works with the international consulting firm Alexis International. Welcome, Sunil.
Good day.
So before we get into the bigger picture about how this will all affect this deal-making in Kashmir, let's try to just get back to what would it take to organize this operation? Like, for example, the question I have is, if you're going to do something as sophisticated as the Mumbai attacks, you need a hotel to practice in. You need the kind of training isn't going to happen in some village in the hills of Pakistan, I would assume. But talk us through what it would take.
Well, I think first thing, when you look at these types of attacks, there's immense logistics behind them. So we have to sort of look at the big picture. You had to have supply of equipment. You had to have somewhere to train to use the equipment. And ultimately, you had to have a lot of intelligence. That is, you had to have information about the target that you were attacking, or in this case, multiple targets, which would include understanding the security procedures, understanding how to physically get from point A to point B to point C. You had to have detailed maps.
Talk us through what we know. So far as we know, tell us what took place. And as you tell us what took place, tell us the kind of considerations one would have to do to organize such logistics.
All right, let's start with the first phase of the initial waterborne rubber boat insertions, to use the military term. That meant, just for that phase, that meant that the individuals involved have to be taught how to handle a rubber dinghy at night. So
there has to be a ship somewhere, doesn't it?
Right. Let's deal with the people. Then there has to be a ship that they came from. So there's a whole sequence of training that's got to be navally based to learn how to launch a rubber dinghy off a ship, whether it's static or moving, and be able to direct yourself to a particular location.
So drill down into something as simple as that. How long does it take to learn? You need a ship to train with. You have to get in a dinghy. You got to do it over and over again, and unless you're people that already have had military training, but so far we don't know that.
Well, you'd have, even if you were to take let's say a raw soldier who's finished basic training, they at least know how to handle their weapons. It would take weeks to months to perfect it. And if you look at training of special forces, a special forces soldier isn't trained overnight. It takes years to get a special forces soldier to be fully capable of doing everything that they do. They will specialize in a specific area. And if you look at an A team, or if you look at a SEAL team or an SAS team, it doesn't really matter. You'll find that each individual soldier has a specialization, and then they're cross-trained, because of course you have to take into account that you'll take casualties. This takes a long time, let's say a year minimum, to get somebody fully qualified from the point that they even qualify to be a special forces soldier.
But what, so are you saying it would take a year of training to get these guys to do what they did?
Exactly.
So they have to find a group of guys willing to die and willing to train for at least a year.
Absolutely. So you'd have to have a highly motivated group of individuals. And again, using the Western Special Forces model, the average Special Forces soldier is highly intelligent, highly motivated, because ultimately their task is either to kill the enemy or do something to the enemy. In this particular case, these individuals had to have understood this was a one-way trip, so you'd have to look pretty much at the Islamic fundamentalists to find individuals who are willing to die for their cause. Nonetheless, if you have an individual who is a fundamentalist, they're quite willing to go through the training because psychologically they're motivated for the end goal. Now, for the example of just the boats, that's one aspect. The fact that they were moving at night meant they had to be trained at night. You can't just do day training and then magically be able to do it at night. Secondly, they had to have very detailed maps and knowledge of the ground that they were entering. That meant that pre-reconnaissance had been done of all these sites, every single one of them. Detailed maps could be produced. Now, fair enough, with things like Google Earth and the existing technology you can get from the internet, you can get some pretty good stuff, but you still probably had to have somebody go in, physically take photographs, take detailed assessments of how the guards operate, etc., and also a very detailed ground map, because when you look at the movements on the various different locations where the assault teams came, they clearly had a movement schedule. They were moving from point A to point B to point C. They knew where they were going, and they knew what they were doing along the way. These are not random assaults in the hopes that they might kill a few people.
So one would expect there would have been dry runs in Mumbai going to these places.
Absolutely.
Which wouldn't be too hard to do. No, if you're dressed in normal clothes.
You could walk
in your
it.
Versace t-shirt.
You could walk it. It's as simple as that. You could walk it with a video camera. I mean, this is Marine Drive and that whole area. This is a tourist zone. So it is not unreasonable for somebody to be taking photographs, and nor would you be really questioned if you looked the part. So the bottom line is there's that aspect. Then there's another secondary aspect, the weapons used, the logistics behind the munitions. These individuals were heavily equipped, and they had to be rearmed, because there's only so much ammunition an individual can carry and move quickly. I think this is a very important point. A modern soldier carries about 40 kilograms of equipment when you add on all his body armor. The bulk of that is his bullets and his weapon. So there had to have been pre-placed munition dumps within the building. So that means it's because these individuals were able to fight for days. The average soldier with the average weight of equipment they carry has enough ammunition to last maybe half a day in that kind of firefights, because there was nonstop firing.
So maybe a year of planning, of training. One would think, I don't know how long of recruiting to find the right people. You can't just go to a madras and pick up any kid. You're assuming. Let's assuming it's from a madras. Let's assume it's Islamic fundamentalist. The evidence is pointing that way. There's lots of theories, but for the sake of argument, let's assume. We know the McClatchy journalist that we did a story on this a couple of days ago tracked down the village of the surviving militant, and he apparently was recruited maybe 3 to 4 years ago. At any rate, a process of recruitment, you're saying maybe a year of training. I don't know how much.
I'd say minimum of a year training.
And then planning. So this operation was ready to go at some point, and then someone had to decide, okay, today's the day we're going to pull the trigger. So in the next segment of our interview, let's talk about why that day did someone decide to pull the trigger, and we'll do some speculation about who might have decided to pull that trigger. So please join us for the next segment of our interview with Sunil Ram.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars and into environmental disaster, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Real hope means facing a complex reality. Your tax-deductible donation makes it possible. Please contribute. Visit therealnews.com.